After Dad's $4,800,000 estate opened, my blood sugar hit 658. My brother filmed instead of helping. 3 weeks later, labs proved he'd swapped my insulin with saline. I awoke on the restroom floor at 2:47 a.m. Paramedics strapped an oxygen mask on my face, while my brother stood in the doorway recording with his phone. Not helpful. Filming. My blood sugar level was 658. The usual range is 70 to 110. At 630 you begin to get diabetic ketoacidosis. At 760, you die. The lead paramedic continued asking when I had last taken my insulin, and I kept telling him 3 hours ago, right before bed, as I had done every night for the preceding 12 years. He gazed at my brother. My brother looked at his phone, and something about that interchange chilled my skin in a way that had nothing to do with the medical crisis actually killing me. The estate struggle began 7 weeks earlier, when our father died of a fatal heart attack at the age of 65, leaving behind a commercial real estate portfolio valued around $4.8 million. My father will share everything 50-50 between me and my brother Caleb. Simple, clean, and fair. Except Caleb had been Dad's business partner for the previous 9 years, while I had been teaching high school chemistry 3 states away. Caleb had access to all of the funds, assets, and papers. He'd been residing at Dad's house since the funeral, purportedly preparing things for probate. I drove down from Michigan to our hometown of Columbus, Ohio, 12 days after Dad died to remain at his house throughout the estate settlement. That's when my diabetes started acting up. I am 35 years old. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 24, shortly after graduating from college. It's been a part of my daily routine for more than 10 years. I understand my body. I recognize the warning signals of high blood sugar, extreme thirst, frequent urination, impaired vision and exhaustion. I understand how excellent control feels against negative control. And I'd had great control for years. My latest A1C test, 4 months before Dad died, was 6.1, which is practically ideal for a diabetic. My endocrinologist, Dr. Michael S. Carter from Ann Arbor Medical Center, genuinely praised me at my previous checkup. So, when I began having hypoglycemic symptoms while taking my insulin on a regular basis, I blamed it on stress. Grief causes unexpected changes in your body. Cortisol levels increase. Sleep habits become interrupted. Food habits change. It seemed reasonable that my blood sugar would be more difficult to regulate. Except, it wasn't only more difficult to control. It was totally uncontrolled. Before injecting long-acting insulin at night, I would check my blood sugar. Let us pretend it was 135. Slightly high but doable. I would inject my customary dose of 36 units, which I had been taking for 2 years. Then I'd check again in the morning, anticipating it to be anywhere between 90 and 110. Instead, it would read 380, 420, or 511. I hadn't seen these numbers since I was initially diagnosed and had no idea how to control the condition. Numbers that didn't make sense considering my insulin regimen. I began monitoring my blood sugar every 2 hours and even set alarms to wake up during the night. The trend was constant and disturbing. My insulin simply wasn't functioning. I phoned Dr. Carter's office on a Thursday morning after a particularly horrible night in which my blood sugar reached 512. I spoke with Lauren Hayes, his nurse practitioner who had been overseeing my treatment for the previous 20 months. She asked all the appropriate questions. Have I modified my diet? No. Was I unwell from an infection? No. Was I experiencing extraordinary stress? Well, yeah. My father had recently died and I was dealing with his inheritance. She indicated that stress hormones might definitely develop insulin resistance, making my regular dosages less effective. She upped my overnight long-acting dose from 36 to 44 units and instructed me to call back in 4 days if things did not improve. They did not improve. They became worse. Caleb was quite helpful throughout this time. He saw I wasn't feeling well and kept asking if he could help. He'd bring me bottles of water whenever I mentioned being thirsty. He'd offer to prepare dinner so that I could relax. He'd ask about my blood sugar levels and shake his head compassionately when I informed him they were high. One night, he sat with me in the kitchen while I prepared my injection. Is it scary? He inquired, observing me draw insulin from the container into the syringe. Knowing you must do this every day or you will die. I advised him to get accustomed to it. You don't fully consider the stakes anymore. It becomes routine, much like cleaning your teeth. He nodded slowly and looked at the vial of insulin on the counter. Where do you keep it? In the fridge. I informed him. Yes. In the door of the upstairs bathroom fridge, the small one Dad installed when Mom was sick. Caleb was aware that he had previously lived in this house, but he inquired nevertheless. The estate lawyer, Thomas Whitaker of Whitaker and Associates, planned our first official meeting for Monday morning, 4 weeks after I arrived. I was feeling really bad by that moment. The persistently elevated blood sugar was creating a variety of secondary symptoms. Constant exhaustion, difficulties concentration, and blurry eyesight made reading texts uncomfortable. Frequent visits to the restroom disrupted the conference several times. Whitaker often paused his explanation of the probate procedure to ask if I wanted a break. I continued apologizing and explaining that I was all right, just struggling with some health concerns. Caleb sat across the meeting table, hands folded, appearing worried and patient. "Maybe we should reschedule," he said after my third restroom trip. "You clearly aren't feeling well." Whitaker agreed that it could be best. We rescheduled on the following Monday. I left the meeting feeling ashamed and irritated. I had seemed incompetent in front of our father's lawyer. Worse, I had appeared unstable, as if I couldn't handle fundamental adult obligations. That evening I upped my insulin dosage without first phoning Dr. Carter's office. I took 58 units rather than 44. It was foolish and even hazardous to take such a large jump without medical supervision, but I was desperate. I needed to get my blood sugar under control before our next appointment with Whitaker. I couldn't afford to appear distraught during the estate processes. My blood sugar level before bedtime was 371. The following morning, it was 552. I had taken 58 units of long-acting insulin, and my blood sugar had risen by 181 points. That isn't how insulin works. That is not how any of this works. Something wasn't right with me. Something outside stress, bereavement, or insulin resistance. I scheduled an appointment with a local endocrinologist, Dr. Allison Grant, at Columbus Diabetes Associates, and was seen 2 days later after stressing the situation was an emergency. Dr. Grant was in her late 40s, with gray-streaked hair and the calm analytical manner of a specialist dealing with a medical emergency. She looked at my blood sugar logs, insulin dosage data, and a recent A1C test from Michigan. Then she examined me, looking for evidence of lipohypertrophy, a kind of scar tissue that might interfere with insulin absorption. Everything seemed perfect. She ordered a full blood workup, which included a C-peptide test to assess my pancreatic function, a hormone imbalance screening, and an insulin antibody test. "I'm going to be honest with you," she added, removing her exam gloves. "The presentation does not make physiological sense. You should respond to these insulin dosages. We need to find out why you aren't." The blood test was returned within 36 hours. Everything was usual. My pancreas was not making insulin, as predicted for type 1 diabetes. My thyroid function was fine. There is no illness, no hormonal imbalance, and no insulin antibodies. Dr. Grant phoned me personally to explain the findings. "I want you to come back in and bring your insulin vials," she told me. "All of them, including the ones you're using now and any backups you have. I'd like to test them." I asked her what she felt was wrong. There was a lengthy delay on the line. "I don't want to speculate until we rule out environmental factors," she explained cautiously. "However, if your insulin is incorrectly maintained or contaminated, this might explain why it isn't working. Can you come tomorrow morning?" I said yes. I grabbed all of my insulin vials that evening. I had 3. The one I was using from the bathroom fridge, a backup in the same fridge, and an unopened one in my luggage case from Michigan. I arranged them on my dresser to bring to Dr. Grant in the morning. Then I headed downstairs to prepare dinner. Caleb was in the kitchen, staring at his phone. "Are you okay?" he inquired, looking up. "You've seemed stressed lately." I assured him I was all right, but annoyed with my blood sugar concerns. He nodded compassionately. "So, let me know if there's anything I can do to assist. We are in this together, right? Dad would have wanted us to take care of one another." I thanked him and reheated the leftovers. After supper, I returned upstairs to prepare my nightly injection. When I reached for the vials on my dresser, the backup vial was in a different location than I had placed it. Not much altered, but slightly displaced, about an inch to the left, something you may miss if you weren't paying attention. My hands became shaky. I told myself I was too paranoid. I persuaded myself that the stress of Dad's death, the estate processes, and my medical concerns were causing me to perceive conspiracies where none existed. I assured myself Caleb wouldn't do that. He was my brother. We had grown up together. We had shared a room until I went to college. He'd been there when I was initially diagnosed with diabetes, teaching me how to administer injections and monitor my blood sugar levels. He phoned me every few months to see how I was doing and whether my diabetes was under control. He cared for me. But I also recall what Dad had stated approximately a year before his death. During one of our phone discussions, he said that Caleb had been pressing for a change in the business structure that would make Caleb the major owner and Dad a silent partner. Dad had refused. "I built this company," he had stated. "I'm not signing it away while I'm still alive and capable." Caleb had been furious with the choice. Very furious. I did not take my insulin that night. Instead, I visited a 24-hour pharmacy and purchased 3 fresh vials with my insurance. They were pricey, at $110 each, even with insurance. But I had to know. I needed to exclude the idea that something was amiss with my existing supply. I took my nightly dosage with one of the brand new drugstore vials. My blood sugar level before the injection was 382. When I woke up the next morning and tested again, it was 109, which is normal, healthy, and exactly where it should be. After an appropriate dosage of long-acting insulin, I sat on the side of my bed, looking at the glucose meter display, feeling chilly all over my body. The insulin from the pharmacist worked. The insulin from my bathroom fridge did not work, indicating that my medicine had been tampered with. I phoned Dr. Grant and informed her that I had found out the problem. She questioned what I meant. I described buying fresh insulin at the pharmacy and receiving a normal result for the first time in weeks. She paused for a bit before saying, "Bring in all of your old vials today if possible. I'm going to have them evaluated by our lab and file a report with the Ohio Board of Pharmacy. If your medicine was tampered with, this is a serious offense." I agreed to come in within an hour. Then I went to the bathroom fridge and got the vials. The current one I was using was still there. The backup vial was gone. I had noticed it the night before on my dresser. It wasn't in either the bathroom or my bedroom. I looked for 25 minutes before acknowledging the apparent reality. Someone had snatched it. Someone who realized I was growing suspicious. Someone gained access to the house and my stuff. Someone who was my brother. I drove to Dr. Grant's office with the 2 leftover vials. The one I was currently using, and the unopened one from my Michigan travel case. Dr. Grant greeted me in an exam room with a worried expression that made her appear older than she did at our initial session. She gave over the vials to a lab worker who photographed them and filled out chain of custody documents. "These will go to Ohio State's Medical Forensics Lab," Dr. Grant added. "They may evaluate the contents to see whether there has been any replacement or contamination. The procedure takes around 4 to 6 business days." I asked her what she believed had happened. She selected her words carefully. "In my 17 years of practicing endocrinology, I've encountered 3 instances of pharmaceutical manipulation. Both included family members with financial incentives. I cannot make allegations, but anybody with access to your insulin might readily replace it with saline solution or another transparent liquid. The vials appear identical. Without advanced testing, you'd never know." I did not return to Dad's place that night. I got into a downtown hotel and paid with cash since I didn't want Caleb to be able to monitor my credit card. I sat in my hotel room, reflecting on everything that had transpired during the previous 4 weeks. My blood sugar difficulties began shortly after I arrived at the residence. Caleb's remarkable care, giving me water, inquiring about my diabetes control, seeing me prepare injections, and his query about where I kept my insulin, which he already knew but asked nevertheless. At the rescheduled estate conference, I appeared incompetent and unstable, just the type of person whose judgment could be challenged in probate court. The missing backup vial from the night made me suspect. And at the heart of it all, there's the money. $4.8 million shared between 2 brothers, unless one brother is judged unable to manage his inheritance. I contacted the Columbus Police non-emergency number and requested to talk with someone about a possible attempted murder. The dispatcher connected me with Detective Marcus Reed of the Major Crimes Unit. Reed had worked with CPD for 21 years, according to the brief history he provided me when we met at the station the next morning. He was in his mid-40s, with graying hair and sad eyes from witnessing too many betrayals inside his family. I told him everything. Dad's death, the multi-million-dollar inheritance, my odd blood sugar issue, the insulin that stopped functioning, the lost backup vial, and the drugstore insulin that worked wonderfully. Reed listened without interrupting and took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he put down his pen and stared directly at me. "Do you still have access to your father's home?" he asked. I said, "Yes, I still had my key." "Don't go back there alone," Reed said. "If what you're saying is correct, your brother tried to murder you. The fact that he's photographing your medical emergency shows that he's documenting your alleged instability for legal reasons. This was deliberate. This is sophisticated. This is someone who has planned every step." Detective Reed directed Officer Nolan Park to accompany me back to the residence to grab my possessions and any evidence. Park was younger, perhaps in his early 30s, with an intense focus that made you feel both safe and little apprehensive. We got at the house about 10:30 a.m. on a Friday. Caleb's automobile was gone. I let us in with my key and immediately went upstairs to the bathroom. The insulin vial I had been using was still inside the refrigerator door. Park shot it in place before carefully bagging it as evidence, using a body camera to film the entire process. Next, we searched my bedroom. Park discovered an empty insulin bottle in the trash bin next to my dresser, buried among crumpled papers and tissues. Not one of mine, but an extra vial mistakenly dumped by someone who assumed it would be disposed of with the ordinary trash. Park also grabbed that. We then searched Caleb's room. I felt bad about it. Invasive, as if I was breaking some basic trust between brothers. However, Park was thorough and professional, inspecting drawers and closets with trained skill. In Caleb's bedside table, below a stack of financial paperwork pertaining to Dad's estate, Park found a box of saline solution vials, the sort used for wound irrigation or medical treatments. If you don't look closely at the label, it appears precisely like insulin. Park held up the box without touching it directly, using a pen to flip up the top. 2 vials were missing from the original box of 10. Park shot everything from numerous angles, then bagged the entire package. "We'll test these against your insulin vials," he added. "If the contents match, we have physical evidence of substitution. Combined with the medical paperwork from your doctor, this creates a prosecutable case." We were placing the evidence into Park's patrol cruiser when Caleb's vehicle came into the driveway. He climbed out slowly, glancing between me, the uniformed officer, and the evidence bags with an expression that cycled through perplexity, concern, and something more. Something calculated. "What's going on?" he asked, directing the question at me rather than Park. "Is everything okay? Did anything happen?" I did not say anything. Park went forward with his badge displayed. "I'm Officer Nolan Park with Columbus PD. We're collecting evidence related to an ongoing investigation. Do you live at this residence?" Caleb nodded, his gaze never leaving my face. "This is my father's house. My brother and I are both residing here while we settle the estate. What investigation? What evidence?" Park didn't answer. Instead, he requested Caleb to move aside as we completed loading the van. Caleb obeyed, but I could see his mind working, trying to figure out what I knew and what I might show. Detective Marcus Reed phoned me that evening with preliminary results from Ohio State's Medical Forensics Lab. They'd fast-tracked the analysis given the attempted murder claims. "The vial you were actively using," Reed continued, "contains approximately 80% saline solution and 20% insulin. Not enough insulin to be medically useful, but enough that you wouldn't quickly know something was wrong. The saline dilution explains why your blood sugar kept increasing after taking what you believed were enough doses. The unopened vial from your travel case is pure insulin, no tampering, and the empty vial we found in your trash matches the saline solution boxes in your brother's room. Same manufacturer, same batch number." I inquired what occurred next. "Now we build the case," Reed remarked. "We have physical evidence, medical documentation, and opportunity. What we need is motivation testimony, and any proof proving your brother's financial interest in you, seeming incompetent." I called Thomas Whitaker, the estate attorney, and demanded copies of every correspondence between him and Caleb over the preceding 7 weeks. Whitaker was professionally reluctant, until I indicated there was a current police investigation into alleged estate fraud and attempted murder. That changed his tone dramatically. He sent over the emails within 2 hours. There were 41 messages total. Most were standard queries regarding probate processes and property appraisals, but 6 communications sent over the period of 12 days voiced worries about my abilities to manage my inheritance. The first email was sent 4 days after I arrived at the residence. "I'm worried about my brother's health. He appears highly unorganized and is having problems controlling his diabetes. Is there a method for medical examination if one successor looks unable to perform financial responsibilities?" The second email followed 6 days later. "My brother had to leave our meeting multiple times due to health issues and seemed confused about basic estate details. I want to make sure he's safeguarded, even if it requires greater oversight of his portion." The cycle continued, each communication meticulously documenting my seeming deterioration, while posing Caleb as the worried responsible sibling seeking to safeguard both of us. Dr. Grant provided a comprehensive medical report detailing my 12-year history of excellent diabetes management, my recent unexplained hypoglycemic crisis, and the immediate normalization of my blood sugar once I switched to uncompromised insulin. Based on the patient's medical history and the laboratory confirmation of insulin tampering, She wrote in her conclusion, "It is my professional opinion that the patient's hypoglycemic episodes were iatrogenically induced through intentional medication substitution. Without intervention, the patient would have progressed to diabetic ketoacidosis, coma, and likely death within days to weeks." She attached my blood sugar logs, showing the dramatic contrast between the 4 weeks of using tampered insulin and the immediate improvement with pharmacy insulin. The documentation was devastating and indisputable. Detective Reed brought Caleb in for questioning on a Monday morning, exactly 5 weeks after the paramedics had found me unconscious on the bathroom floor. I wasn't present for the interview, but Reed recorded everything and played portions back for me later. Caleb maintained his innocence throughout, claiming he had no idea how saline solution ended up in his bedside table, suggesting maybe I'd planted it there to frame him out of grief-induced paranoia. He said he'd been nothing but supportive during my health crisis, that his emails to the estate attorney were genuine expressions of concern, not attempts to undermine my competency. When Reed presented him with the test proof confirming the insulin had been tampered with, Caleb argued maybe the pharmacy had made a mistake, or maybe my diabetes had merely moved to a more severe level. His explanations grew increasingly desperate and contradictory as the interview continued. The breakthrough came when Reed asked Caleb about the video footage, the footage from my medical emergency, which Caleb had filmed on his phone instead of helping. "Why were you recording your brother during a medical crisis?" Reed asked. There was a long silence on the recording. Then Caleb said something that destroyed any remaining pretense of innocence. "I needed documentation for the estate proceedings to show he wasn't capable of managing his portion." Reed asked him to clarify. "Documentation of what specifically?" Another pause. "Of his mental state, his instability." The lawyer said it would be helpful if there were concerns about competency. Reed pressed further. "So you were documenting your brother's medical emergencies to use against him in a state court, and you saw no reason to help him instead?" Caleb realized his mistake too late. He tried to backtrack, claiming he'd called 911 first before recording, that he'd only filmed for a few seconds, but the damage was done. He'd admitted to documenting my crisis for legal advantage rather than providing help. The Ohio prosecutor's office filed charges 4 days later. Attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, the tampered insulin qualified as a weapon under Ohio law, and estate fraud. The prosecutor, Madeline Pierce, had spent 14 years in major crimes and had a reputation for being thorough and merciless with white-collar criminals who hurt family members. She scheduled a preliminary hearing for 12 days out. In the meantime, Detective Reed executed a search warrant for all of Caleb's electronic devices, his phone, laptop, tablet, and cloud storage accounts. The digital forensics team found things that made the case even worse. Caleb had researched insulin tampering methods 4 weeks before Dad died. He'd visited forums discussing how to induce diabetic crises without being detected. He'd researched estate competency laws and medical conservatorship procedures. He'd even calculated how long it would take for sustained hypoglycemia to cause permanent organ damage or death. Every search, every calculation, every research query had been saved in his browser history like a roadmap of premeditated attempted murder. But the most damaging evidence came from Caleb's text messages with his girlfriend, someone named Rebecca Dalton, who worked in medical billing at a local hospital. The messages went back 7 months to before Dad's death. In them, Caleb complained about having to share the estate 1/2 to 1/2 when he'd done all the work building Dad's business. He wrote things like, "Why should he get half when he's been gone for years? And there has to be a way to contest the will." Rebecca had apparently suggested using my diabetes against me. "Doesn't he have to take insulin every day? What if something happened with that? Like if he seemed really sick or unstable?" Caleb's response: "That's genius. If he can't manage his own health, how can he manage millions of dollars?" The text chain continued over weeks, with Rebecca providing information about insulin storage and effectiveness, Caleb planning when to make the switch, and both of them discussing how to document my decline for legal purposes. The preliminary hearing was brief and brutal. Prosecutor Pierce presented the physical evidence, the medical documentation, the text messages, and the search history. Caleb's attorney, a public defender named Daniel Mercer, who looked increasingly uncomfortable as the evidence mounted, argued that the case was circumstantial, that the text messages were taken out of context, that Caleb's research could have been motivated by genuine concern for my health. Judge Evelyn Hart, who'd been on the bench for 24 years and had presided over some of Ohio's most notorious family crime cases, wasn't buying it. "Counsel," she said, removing her glasses and addressing Mercer directly. "Your client researched how to make someone diabetic appear unstable, purchased the materials to tamper with medication, had access to the victim's medication storage, exchanged texts, planning this exact scenario, and filmed the resulting medical crisis instead of providing aid. At what point does this stop being circumstantial and start being a clear pattern of intentional harm? She bound Caleb over for trial with bail set at $600,000. He couldn't make bail. He stayed in county lockup, awaiting trial. The estate proceedings took a different turn after the charges were filed. Thomas Whitaker filed a motion to pause probate pending the outcome of the criminal trial. Ohio has a slayer statute that prevents criminals from inheriting from their victims. And while Dad's death itself was natural causes, the argument was that Caleb's attempt to murder me for my inheritance disqualified him from benefiting from Dad's estate. Judge Hart agreed to pause the proceedings until the criminal case concluded. In the meantime, the court appointed a neutral third-party administrator to manage Dad's properties and accounts. I was relieved. I didn't want the money anymore. I just wanted to understand how my brother, someone I'd grown up with and trusted completely, could look at me and see nothing but an obstacle to wealth. The trial took place 5 months after my near-death experience. The prosecution's case was methodical and overwhelming. Dr. Grant testified about the medical impossibility of my blood sugar crisis occurring naturally given my history. Dr. Carter, my Michigan endocrinologist, testified via video about my years of excellent control. The Ohio State forensic chemist testified about the insulin dilution and saline substitution. Detective Reed testified about finding the empty vial in my trash and the saline boxes in Caleb's room. Officer Park testified about the evidence collection. The digital forensic specialist testified about Caleb's research history and text messages. And I testified about watching my brother film me during a medical emergency instead of helping. About the missing backup insulin vial. About realizing someone I loved had spent weeks systematically poisoning me. Caleb's defense was weak and desperate. Attorney Mercer tried to argue that Rebecca Dalton had been the mastermind, that she'd manipulated Caleb into this scheme, that he'd just been going along with her suggestions without really understanding the consequences. The jury didn't buy it. Caleb was 37 years old, a successful businessman who'd co-managed a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio. He wasn't some naive victim led astray by a girlfriend. The text messages showed him actively planning, researching, and executing the medication tampering. Rebecca was charged separately as an accomplice and took a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Caleb in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony was devastating. She described how Caleb had asked her for advice about making someone look medically unreliable. How he'd specifically mentioned my diabetes as a vulnerability. How he'd laughed about me getting sicker while he documented everything for the estate case. The jury deliberated for under 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder in the first degree. Assault with a deadly weapon. Estate fraud. Judge Evelyn Hart scheduled sentencing for 12 days later. When that day came, she delivered a statement that I'll remember for the rest of my life. "Mr. Parker," she said, addressing Caleb directly as he stood in his orange jumpsuit and restraints. "You looked at your brother and saw only money. You took his trust, his love, and his medical vulnerability and weaponized them in service of greed. You researched how to kill him slowly enough that it would look like natural causes or medical mismanagement. You documented his suffering not to help, but to use against him. You stole weeks of his life and nearly stole all of it. This court finds your actions to be among the most callous and calculated it has encountered." She sentenced him to 21 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for the first 14. Rebecca Dalton got 6 years for conspiracy and accomplice to attempted murder. The estate proceedings resumed after the conviction. Under Ohio's Slayer statute, Caleb was disqualified from inheriting anything from Dad's estate. His entire one-half share reverted to me by default. I inherited everything. The properties, the business, the bank accounts, all $4.8 million, plus the appreciation that had occurred during the 9 months of legal proceedings. Thomas Whitaker handled the final transfer with professional efficiency. When he handed me the last document to sign, he said something that struck me as both true and terrible. "Your father built this legacy to provide for both his sons. It must break his heart, wherever he is, to know one son tried to murder the other for it." I signed the papers and walked out of Whitaker's office as the sole heir to everything Dad had worked for, and all I felt was empty. I moved back to Michigan 12 days later. I couldn't stay in Columbus. Couldn't live in Dad's house where my brother had spent weeks slowly poisoning me while I slept down the hall. I sold the house and most of the properties, keeping only 3 small commercial buildings that generated steady rental income. The money went into trust accounts managed by financial advisors I'd never met, people with no connection to my family or our history. I didn't want to think about it. Didn't want to manage it. Didn't want the wealth that had almost killed me. I went back to teaching high school chemistry. My students had no idea what I'd been through. They just knew me as Mr. Parker, the teacher who sometimes used diabetes management as an example when teaching about biochemistry and molecular interactions. Dr. Carter recommended I see a therapist to process everything that had happened. I started seeing Dr. Sofia Ramirez, a trauma specialist in Ann Arbor, who'd worked with victims of family violence. The first few sessions were just me trying to articulate how it felt to realize my brother had watched me get sicker and done nothing, had actively made me sicker, had filmed my near-death experience like it was content for his legal case. Dr. Ramirez helped me understand that betrayal trauma is different from other types of trauma because it destroys your baseline ability to trust. You have to rebuild your sense of safety from the ground up. She said, you have to learn that what happened with your brother was specific to him, not representative of all relationships or all family bonds. It took months before I could even begin to believe that. I still check my insulin obsessively. Every vial gets inspected before use. I bought a small safe for my medication, and I'm the only one with the combination. I test my blood sugar more frequently than necessary, paranoid that somehow the numbers will start climbing again, even though I know rationally that I'm using uncompromised insulin from sealed pharmacy containers. The trauma left marks that go beyond the physical. My current A1C is back to 6.3. Excellent control, according to Dr. Carter. But the psychological cost of what Caleb did can't be measured in blood glucose levels or hemoglobin markers. I visited Caleb in prison once, about 14 months after his conviction. I don't know why I went. Maybe I needed closure. Maybe I needed to hear him explain how he justified it to himself. Maybe I needed to see him in that gray prison uniform and understand that justice had been served. We sat across from each other in the visitation room with a plexiglass barrier between us and phones connecting our voices. He looked older, smaller somehow, diminished by incarceration. I asked him why. Why had he done it? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I convinced myself you didn't deserve it. Half of everything Dad built. You left, went to Michigan, became a teacher. I stayed here, worked with him every day, learned the business. In my mind, I'd earned it all, and you'd earned nothing. The money became more important than you being alive. I don't know when that happened, but it did. I asked if he was sorry. He nodded. Every single day. But that doesn't change anything, does it? I told him. No, it didn't. Then I hung up the phone and left. I haven't been back. The weird thing about surviving attempted murder by a family member is that people don't know how to talk to you about it. They offer condolences like you've lost someone to natural causes. They say things like, at least he's in prison now, as if incarceration equals healing. They avoid asking questions because they don't want to be intrusive. So you end up carrying the story alone. My colleagues at the high school know what happened. It made local news in Michigan too. But no one mentions it. I'm just the chemistry teacher who takes insulin before lunch and sometimes zones out during faculty meetings because I'm remembering what it felt like to wake up with paramedics strapping a mask to my face while my brother stood in the doorway filming. Dr. Ramirez says, I'm making progress. I've started dating again cautiously and with significant trust issues that I'm upfront about from the start. I've reconnected with friends I'd pulled away from during the estate proceedings. I've established new routines that feel safe and controllable. But there are still moments when the weight of everything crashes down. Like when I'm preparing my nighttime injection and I have a flash of panic wondering if the insulin is real. Or when I pass estate planning offices and remember sitting in Whitaker's conference room feeling like I was dying while my brother calmly documented my incompetence for legal advantage. Or when I see news stories about families torn apart by inheritance disputes, and I think about how Dad never could have imagined his estate would become my attempted murder weapon. The money from Dad's estate sits in accounts I rarely access. I live on my teacher's salary, about $68,000 a year, which is enough for a decent apartment and a reliable car, and the occasional weekend trip. The inheritance feels like blood money, tainted by what Caleb did to get it. But Dr. Ramirez reminds me that Dad wanted me to have it. That using it doesn't mean accepting what Caleb did. That I'm allowed to benefit from my father's legacy without carrying guilt for my brother's crimes. Rationally, I understand that. Emotionally, I'm still working on it. I've started using small amounts to fund diabetes research at the Ohio State Medical School, and to support programs teaching high school students about science and medicine. If Dad's money has to be part of my life, at least it can do some good. Sometimes I wonder if Caleb thinks about what he lost. Not the inheritance or the properties or the business partnership with Dad. Those are just money and assets. I wonder if he thinks about losing a brother. If he remembers the years before greed made me into a target instead of family. We used to be close, or I thought we were. We'd call each other every few months to catch up. We'd visit during holidays when our schedules aligned. He'd helped me through my diabetes diagnosis, learning about the disease alongside me so he could understand what I was dealing with. Or maybe that was research too. Maybe he was always calculating, always looking for advantages, always seeing relationships as transactions. I'll never know which memories were real and which were strategy. Judge Hart's words come back to me often. You looked at your brother and saw only money. That's what haunts me most. Not the physical danger, not even the betrayal itself, but the reduction of everything we'd been to each other down to a dollar amount. $2.4 million to be exact. That's what my half of the estate was worth. That's what Caleb decided was worth watching me die. The math is simple and horrifying. My life, my trust, our shared childhood, our father's love for both of us. All of it calculated and found less valuable than money. You can't come back from understanding that. You can't unknow that equation. I still have the glucometer reading from that first morning after using the pharmacy insulin. 109, normal, safe, proof that my body wasn't failing, that my diabetes hadn't suddenly become uncontrollable, that the crisis was manufactured. I kept the printout in a drawer for months, looking at it sometimes when I needed to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that my suspicions had been justified, that the person who tried to kill me was actually imprisoned for it and not walking around free. Dr. Ramirez eventually suggested I let go of that printout, that holding on to physical evidence was keeping me stuck in survival mode when I needed to move toward recovery. I threw it away, but I still remember the number 109, the proof that saved my life. The criminal case made local news, but never went national. Ohio teachers didn't recognize my name or my story when I returned to Michigan. I was grateful for that anonymity. I could rebuild my life without carrying the label of that guy, whose brother tried to kill him for inheritance money. My students know me as someone who explains molecular bonds with enthusiasm and occasionally brings in donuts for the class. My neighbors know me as the quiet guy in Unit 4C who's pleasant in the elevator and always sorts his recycling correctly. My therapist knows the full story and a few close friends know the outline. But most of my world is built on normal interactions that have nothing to do with attempted murder or family betrayal or estate fraud. That normality is precious and a hard one. There are good days now. Days where I don't think about Caleb or the tampered insulin or the paramedics finding me on the bathroom floor. Days where my diabetes is just a manageable chronic condition rather than a weapon someone used against me. Days where I can enjoy teaching chemistry without the irony of explaining how molecules interact while remembering that someone used molecular manipulation to try to kill me. Those days are increasing in frequency, and Dr. Ramirez says that's the definition of healing. Not forgetting what happened, but reducing how much space it takes up in your daily existence. I'm working on that. Some days are easier than others. I keep Dad's watch, the one Mom gave him on their 20th anniversary. Caleb hadn't wanted it during the estate division because it wasn't worth much monetarily. Just a regular Seiko with a leather band worn from years of daily use. But it was Dad's, and wearing it makes me feel connected to the parent who loved both of his sons and never imagined one would try to murder the other. Sometimes I wonder what Dad would say if he knew what happened. Whether he'd understand how money corrupted Caleb. Whether he'd blame himself for building an estate valuable enough to kill for. Whether he'd forgive either of us, me for surviving and keeping everything, Caleb for attempting murder and losing everything. I'll never know. Dad died thinking his sons would take care of each other after he was gone. Instead, one of us tried to kill the other before the funeral flowers had wilted. I got a letter from Caleb 2 months ago. The prison screened it and forwarded it to my attorney first, protocol for contact between criminals and their victims. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten, full of apologies and regrets and explanations that didn't really explain anything. He wrote about the moment he decided to tamper with my insulin. How he'd convinced himself it was just to make me look unreliable for a few weeks, not to actually kill me. How things had spiraled beyond his original intent. How he wished he could take it back. How he understood if I never forgave him. How he hoped I was doing okay and managing my diabetes well. The cognitive dissonance of that last line, hoping I'm managing the disease he'd weaponized against me, would be funny if it wasn't so tragic. My attorney asked if I wanted to respond. I said, no. What would I even say? Some betrayals are too profound for communication to bridge. Next month marks 4 years since the night I woke up on the bathroom floor with my blood sugar at 658. 4 years since my brother filmed my near death instead of helping. 4 years since I learned that the person who'd grown up sharing a room with me could look at me and see only an obstacle to wealth. Dr. Ramirez says anniversaries of trauma are difficult, that I should expect the memories to feel more intense as the date approaches. She's right. I've been having more nightmares lately. Dreams where I'm checking my blood sugar and the numbers keep climbing no matter how much insulin I take. Dreams where I'm searching for the tampered vials but can't find them. Dreams where I'm trying to tell someone what's happening, but no one believes me. I wake up and check my glucometer immediately, confirming that my blood sugar is normal, that the insulin is working, that I'm safe. It takes a while for my heart rate to settle. The inheritance money funded a diabetes education program at my high school. I worked with the district to create a comprehensive curriculum teaching students about metabolic disorders, insulin function, and the daily realities of chronic disease management. We bring in endocrinologists to speak, demonstrate continuous glucose monitors, and explain how modern medicine allows diabetics to live normal lives. I don't tell the students why I started this program or what happened with my brother. I just teach them that diabetes is manageable, that insulin is life-saving, and that understanding biochemistry can literally save lives. One of my students, a girl named Haley, who was diagnosed with type 1 last year, told me the program helped her feel less alone and less afraid. That made everything feel slightly more bearable. Dad's money filtered through Caleb's crime and my survival, helping a 16-year-old girl understand she's going to be okay. It's not redemption, but it's something. I still teach chemistry. I still take my insulin. I still check my blood sugar religiously. I still see Dr. Ramirez every week. I still avoid Columbus and anything associated with Dad's estate. I still have nightmares about my brother standing in the doorway with his phone out filming. But I'm alive. That's the irreducible fact underneath everything else. Caleb tried to kill me methodically and deliberately over the course of 4 weeks. He researched it, planned it, executed it, and documented it. And I'm still here. That survival doesn't erase the trauma or heal the betrayal, but it matters. Judge Hart said Caleb stole weeks of my life and nearly stole all of it. But he didn't. He's in prison serving 21 years, and I'm in Michigan teaching students about molecular bonds and living a quiet life he tried to take from me. The last thing Dr. Ramirez said in our most recent session was about reclaiming narrative. Your brother wrote a story where you were an obstacle to be removed, she said. But you're writing a different story now. One where you're a survivor, a teacher, someone who took incomprehensible betrayal and transformed it into advocacy and education. That's your narrative. That's your power. I'm still figuring out what that means in practice. Some days I feel powerful, like I've overcome something tremendous and emerged stronger. Other days I feel broken, like the trust Caleb shattered left cracks that will never fully heal. Both things are probably true. Both narratives exist simultaneously. I'm a survivor and I'm wounded. I inherited everything, and I lost my brother. I'm safe now, and I'll never feel completely safe again. That's the reality of living after attempted murder by family. You carry all of it forward, the survival and the scars, and you build whatever life you can from what remains.